Xi Jinping has a very clear goal: to turn China into a fully sovereign technological power that doesn't depend on anyone. He has already achieved this with renewable energy, is sweeping aside European giants like Volkswagen in the automotive sector, and many believe AI will be the next battleground. Do you remember DeepSeek? When this AI model, which did the same thing as its American counterparts but supposedly at a fraction of the cost, hit the market, stock markets around the world soared. But remember, the AI war isn't won by programming alone. It also requires hardware, state-of-the-art microchips like those designed by Nvidia and manufactured by TSMC. And here the West was at ease, because a Dutch company holds an absolute monopoly on the machines used to manufacture these chips and doesn't share them with China. Or at least, it did have the monopoly, until now. In recent days, one new story has shaken the markets. China is beginning to mass produce its own lithography machines for manufacturing microchips. This is a development that many analysts did not expect until 2030. And we're not talking about a prototype, but a fully finished product ready for industrial use. This is precisely why shares of the Dutch company ASML have taken a significant hit. Remember, we're not talking about just any company, but Europe's leading player in artificial intelligence. In fact, it's practically the only one they've got. But don't think that Europe was the only one to get a big scare. Not at all. Everything related to AI, microchips, and data centers is experiencing a global storm.
South Korea's main stock exchange crashes 10% over reports of a breakthrough in Chinese chip manufacturing.
The South Korean stock market, which has been on a rollercoaster ride for the past few months, had to halt trading to prevent a panic-driven mass sell-off of Samsung and other tech stocks. And short positions against Nvidia are on the rise, which means the market sees it as more likely that the American giant could face problems in the future. The fact is, lithography isn't just another industry, it's the bottleneck choking the entire Chinese tech sector. DeepSeek, Huawei, even BYD, the electric vehicle company. None of them are directly involved in lithography, but they all have to spend massive amounts of money on innovation to compensate for the lack of state-of-the-art microchips. And if these companies are changing the world while operating with one hand tied behind their backs, just imagine what they could do if China learns to manufacture its own advanced lithography machines. There's a lot at stake, which is why today we're going to talk about what's happening in China, whether it has truly managed to break ASML's monopoly, or if the stock market and the media are overreacting. But before we continue, if you're interested in the world of investing, if you want to learn how to manage your savings, protect yourself against inflation, and figure out how to make money beyond your day job, I've got some news for you. At Visual Factory, we have created the Visual Factory Club, a newsletter where every week we send out free content focused on essential financial education, the ABC of what everyone should know to understand the stock market, financial markets in general, investment platforms, how to assess investment opportunities, and which markets may have more or less potential. Because of course, if you want to invest your money so you're not at the mercy of your country's economic instability, you at least need to understand the basics of the financial world. In the Visual Factory Club, you'll learn all of this completely free of charge. Through the link below and this QR code, you can sign up for the club and start receiving the upcoming editions. What's more, when you sign up, you'll receive a dossier where I explain in a clear and simple way the most essential investment concepts, what multiples or the PE ratio are, what indices are, ETFs, derivatives, funds, EPS, you get the idea. After that, every week you'll receive additional materials and market analysis to help you stay informed about what's going on. And by the way, the sooner you sign up, the better, since we send each episode of the series by email and every edition is unique. If you're not subscribed, you might miss some of them and you won't be able to access them later. With that said, let's get into the video. I'm sure you've all heard of the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research in Switzerland. Or you've heard of nuclear fusion power plants, which create a miniature sun to generate energy. Or supercomputers the size of several soccer fields, or data centers as long as the city of Paris. But what if I told you that the most complex and technologically advanced machine humanity has ever created isn't any of these titans, but a simple device the size of a bus and weighing less than 200 metric tons. We're talking, of course, about the advanced ultraviolet photolithography machines from ASML, the largest company in all of Europe, with a market capitalization about 15 times that of Volkswagen. You see, photolithography means writing or drawing with light, and that's precisely what these machines do. They use a laser to draw circuits onto silicon, churning out microchips 1,000 times thinner than a strand of hair. Anyway, I think it's clear that these machines are no trivial matter. They are the heart of modern technology. Without ASML, there are no chips. And without chips, there are no advanced computers or anything of the sort. So forget about AI, cell phones, or the PlayStation 5. Well, as it stands, this company currently controls 80% of the entire market, and the remaining 17% is in Japanese hands. But if we focus on the most advanced machines, the ones that manufacture the latest generation chips, the Dutch have a total monopoly, 100% of the market. There's no other company in the entire world that knows how to manufacture these machines. It's that simple. So, what breakthrough has China just achieved? Well, let's see. You can find plenty of headlines out there along the lines of China makes ASML's worst nightmare a reality, but no. All of this commotion stems from the fact that Shanghai Aishengana Electronic Technology Group, a company largely known to the general public, but one that had already been making waves in tech circles, has announced that it plans to manufacture 5 immersion DUV lithography machines this year. Well, actually, nothing has been officially announced. The information was leaked and has since been confirmed by various sources, but at first, no one knew which company was behind these machines. And here we need to take it step by step. Immersion DUV lithography. What on earth is that? Well, we already know what lithography is. DUV stands for deep ultraviolet, a technology that emerged in the 1990s and is the most widely used today, but only for manufacturing mid-range or low-end chips. And immersion refers to a method of using these machines that has been in use for 20 years, involving the insertion of a layer of water between the laser and the silicon. But it's important to make it clear that this has almost nothing to do with extreme ultraviolet, EUV machines, which are the most advanced and in the highest demand. As you can see on the screen, these machines have always generated less revenue for ASML. They are much better and more expensive, yes, but very few are sold. There are only about 300 of them worldwide. Of course, with AI, all of this is going to take a 180-degree turn. In other words, China hasn't revolutionized anything either. It's simply going to produce a machine that the rest of the world has been manufacturing for 20 years, and it will most likely perform significantly worse. Even so, that doesn't mean it has no merit. Every adventure begins with the first step, and no one expected China to take this step so soon. Or to put it another way, the market isn't freaked out by what just happened, it's freaked out by what could happen in the near future. This year, there are only 5 basic machines. By 2027, the projection is for 20, and by 2030, no one knows. But pay attention because there's an important clarification to be made here. ASML has sold many deep ultraviolet machines to China. What it is prohibited from selling are the top of the line, extreme ultraviolet machines. The two technologies sound very similar, but in reality, they are 2 very different worlds. Moving from one to the other isn't like upgrading from an iPhone 10 to an iPhone 11. There's a massive gap, and China is still a long way off. That said, it's probably closer than many people think. In late 2022, the United States, the Netherlands, and Japan reached an agreement to stifle China's technology sector. They were already strictly prohibited from sharing their most advanced technology, but with this agreement, they sought to limit exports of mid-range chips and lithography machines. As a result, China's share of ASML's total revenue dropped from half to less than 20%. But Xi Jinping did not sit idly by. By this point, the Chinese Communist Party had suspected for years that something like this might happen, so it invested massive amounts of money in building its own industry. It started with the simplest components, the ones that don't make money and that no company really cares about. The best example is silicon wafers, which are used to manufacture microchips, a simple, standardized product that can be mass-produced. And as we often say around here, no sooner said than done. In just 5 years, China went from producing virtually no wafers to accounting for 30% of global production. But as is often the case with China, it didn't stop there. It climbed the value chain while learning to manufacture chips on its own. We could give many technical examples, but you can imagine that at almost every stage of microchip manufacturing, there's a Chinese startup getting in on the action. Overall, the Asian giant still doesn't control even 15% of the global market in most processes. But don't forget, it was also irrelevant in the auto industry a decade ago. And look where we are now. So how has it managed to advance so quickly? Well, if you've been following us for a while, you know we've talked a lot about China's ultra-competitive market and Xi Jinping's industrial policy. Yes, all of this is important, but in this case, China has had a little help.
The lack of restrictions on the upstream component supply chain is a significant gap. If the goal is to restrict 5 nanometer, 7 nanometer, and 14 nanometer process technologies, KRF and ARF lithography equipment, photoresist and subcomponents must all be limited. Otherwise, China will be able to reconfigure existing equipment and accelerate domestic development of lithography tools. Semi-analysis, January 2023.
Do you remember the agreement between the United States, the Netherlands, and Japan? Well, many key components were left out. And naturally, the Chinese aren't fools. And here we need to take a brief detour, because if we don't understand this, we don't understand anything. ASML is Europe's largest company by market capitalization, but let's be honest, that's not exactly a huge achievement. In the US, there are about 15 companies with higher market caps. Despite having an absolute monopoly at the heart of artificial intelligence and practically all modern technology, ASML is worth 1/3 as much as Tesla, or 1/7 of Apple or Nvidia. And at first glance, this might seem surprising. Ultimately, a fundamental rule of economics states that when multiple companies are involved in a product's life cycle, from raw materials and manufacturing to distribution and after-sales service, the one that takes the largest share of the final price is the one that's hardest to replace. And you tell me which company is harder to replace than ASML. But then, why is it worth so little? Well, in part because ASML depends on other monopolies, on small and medium-sized companies that manufacture very specific, yet nearly irreplaceable parts. A very well-known example is the lenses that direct the lasers. There's only one company in the entire world that knows how to make that type of lens with such high quality, and, by the way, it's German. We're telling you all this so you understand that ASML doesn't operate in a vacuum. It depends on a great many companies, and those companies have indeed been able to collaborate with China. Or perhaps the Chinese simply bought something from them and reverse engineered it until they figured out how to manufacture it itself. If you add to this the fact that China already had plenty of DUV lithography equipment to tinker with, well, it's not that surprising that they've managed to replicate them. Sure, they may work a little worse. It's like following the same recipe using ingredients from the supermarket or top quality gourmet products. The result will be different, but the hard part is having the recipe, figuring out the steps we don't know, and following the instructions as best as we can. As for the rest, fine-tuning each step, well, that'll come in time. Now then, what if we've been approaching this issue the wrong way from the start? Let me explain. So far, we've only talked about lithography companies, but what if you didn't actually need this technology to win the tech race? Here you could see a microscope image of two state-of-the-art chips. On the left is Huawei's latest model, and on the right is Intel's. The Americans use the latest ultra-deep lithography, while the Chinese have to make do with the lower-end version. But if you look closely, Huawei's chips are smaller. And not only that, they are also more densely packed. It seems that while the US has focused on preventing China from obtaining the most advanced lithography machines, Chinese companies have focused on designing better chips using mediocre technology, much like what DeepSeek did with AI. Nevertheless, things aren't that simple. In the end, DeepSeek did use more Nvidia graphics cards to train its AI than they initially admitted. In other words, they cheated a little. And the same thing is happening here. Yes, Huawei can manufacture very small chips without using ASML's most advanced technology, but size isn't everything. To do this, they have to sacrifice two things: industrial capacity and performance. Making 7 nanometer chips with DUV lithography requires 4 times as many steps as with EUV. The reason is somewhat technical, but that doesn't matter right now. And obviously what does matter is that translates to 4 times less production, but it doesn't end there. These workaround chips consume much more electricity, are 40% more expensive, and are also much slower than normal chips of the same size. By the way, this practice of naming chips by their size, saying they are 7 or 2 nanometer chips, is pure marketing. It's a trade name used throughout the industry, but in reality, they're actually much larger. By way of comparison, these Huawei chips are 30% slower than the ones Apple was manufacturing 6 years ago. And yes, when properly measured, they are also much worse than Intel's. So I'm sorry, but no. This narrative that China is manufacturing ultra-small, high-density chips without Western technology is becoming more and more common, but it's completely false. Xi Jinping himself knows full well that technological sovereignty absolutely depends on manufacturing their own extreme, ultraviolet lithography machines. Believe me, he's pulling out all the stops to make that happen. These 5 DUV lithography machines are just one more step toward that goal. And honestly, it's not the most significant step China has taken in recent years.
China reportedly has a prototype EUV machine built by former ASML employees.
China has carried out a veritable Manhattan Project, investing more than $40 billion in a prototype EUV machine, developed in some hidden basement in Shanghai without anyone finding out. But then again, if the Soviets found out about the atomic bomb and stole the blueprints, the Americans can find out about these things too. As far as we know, the prototype is far from functional, let alone ready for commercial scale production. But it's clear that China is making progress, and the question is no longer whether it will succeed in creating its own domestic extreme ultraviolet lithography industry. The question is when. It certainly won't be in the next few years, but we are sure to be in for another surprise before long. In short, China hasn't destroyed ASML or anything close to that. So, why has its stock price fallen 10%? Well, let's see. In recent years, everything related to AI has been highly volatile. Until now, the big tech companies were making so much money, they didn't know what to do with it. But Google is already burning through cash. That is, spending more than it's bringing in. Of course, this also creates fear. And with so much tension, any news triggers a financial earthquake. But keep in mind, we've already been through this with DeepSeek, Claude, and Kimi, so it's not as new or significant as it might seem. The important thing will be what happens in the coming years. In any case, now that we've gotten this far, it's your turn. How long will it take China to build its own cutting-edge chip industry? Do you think this is a major breakthrough or just another step forward? You can leave your answers down in the comments. And as always, don't forget that here on Visualeconomik, we release new videos every week, so subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon so you don't miss any of our updates. And if you want to understand what's really happening in the markets and learn how to manage your money with more confidence, join the Visual Factory Club. It's completely free and the link's in the description. If you like this video, hit like, and I'll see you in the next one.